Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from everyone at Inside the Hive on the Hornets on Our Side podcast. No Sam Jackler this week, but I am joined by returning guest Matt Sponhour of the Stay Hot podcast. For those who know and listen for the podcast a number of years, you will remember Matt. He was joining me the last 2 years to do our returner rankings, where we rank all of our players from 1 to 15, from most likely to least likely to return. And it's always a good time of year to do this. We've seen enough of the season to have an idea. And it's always interesting to go back and compare from last year. But Matt, it's been 12 months since we last jumped on a call. How have you been?
I've been pretty good. I'm glad to be back to do our annual tradition. These rankings, they always sound super easy. When you hear the idea, you're like, that's not going to be that hard. And then you sit down to do them, and it is difficult, man. It's really not that easy because you're not trying to project what you would do, in which case, you know exactly what it is, but you're trying to project what the Hornets will do. And sometimes that can be pretty difficult.
Yeah.
But I'd say 12 months later, I'm sitting here and we're in about the exact same situation we were 12 months ago.
It might even be the same record as 12 months ago.
It very well could be. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Unfortunately, it's starting to really build here. I mean, the Hornets have been bad for as long as I can remember. I mean, even when they were good, they were like, this is the best we've been in a long time, and it's not that great. But the last few years have been particularly frustrating because it's been the exact same season over and over with the exact same notes, and they're in the exact same position. So it's a bummer, but you never know when they'll break through, I guess.
And to give some reason for optimism, it feels very similar to last year. Last year's team was full of veteran guys, right? PJ Washington, Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward. They should have been better. And the team is pretty similar this year, and it's rebuilt, right? They traded away some of these players to get bad contracts and picks. And the net result has been relatively similar, partly because of the jump that maybe Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball have taken this year. And again, the ongoing injury issues has been disappointing. But let's recap last year's rankings. And I'm not going to go through all 1 to 15, but I think all of our top 5 we had last year, or on the most part, apart from one, are all still here. The 2 big disagreements we had were you had PJ Washington ranked as your 4th most likely Hornets player to return. I had him at 11th. So I win that one, but I had Bryce McGowan's ranked 6th, and you had him, I think, outside your top 10. So you win that one. So we both had kind of one that let us down. But other than that, we were pretty spot on here. Our bottom 5 players, I think, are all off the team, and that's kind of what we said was going to happen last year. So I feel like we did pretty well between us.
Yeah, I think not too bad. I was a little surprised for sure by the PJ move, but you saw it coming more than me. But I'm hoping not to have any big misses this year. Although, honestly, I feel like even though I got one wrong, I'm less confident this season in how the team's going to look next year.
Yeah.
In terms of core guys who could get traded, I feel like a lot of stuff is on the table, maybe as compared to last year. I will say, I just looked it up. December 19th, 2023, the Hornets were 7-18.
There we go.
And December 20th, they were 7-19, which is their current record as of the recording of this video. So,
well, look, everyone say a prayer for Hornets journalists, content creators, YouTubers. It's hard, right, to try and keep covering this team in interesting ways to give you analysis when, like you say, stuff just stays the same. So say a prayer for those people. Looking forward to a Christmas break. Let's get into our rankings for this year. As a reminder, you're going to reveal your rankings one at a time. And if we have a little match, he's back for another year, we're going to hear this man of a match in our rankings, Santa Claus having a little giggle. So, Matt, please reveal the player that you are most confident will be back on the team at this time next year.
Brandon Miller.
There we go. 1 for 1 from the start. Very strong. Was that an easy choice for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a handful of guys where I'd be pretty surprised if they got traded. But the thing with Miller is that he was such a high draft pick. He's such a core piece. And there's so few paths to like why they would move him, as a young rebuilding team with him as one of the main assets. There's a couple of guys like that, but they either I think don't have the upside or don't have the investment or maybe have some other paths and have just been on the team longer, possibly being off. Miller, unless somebody randomly came through with a great offer for him out of nowhere, like it would be a shocking trade. It just wouldn't make sense from where the team is right now. So he was easily my one. He's almost in a tier of his own.
Yeah, I agree. And he's just so easy to fit around any player as well, Brandon Miller. And this is like, when you look at some of the other players on the team we might talk about, like if you have them, you have to make exceptions elsewhere on your roster. And Brandon Miller is just like, even if he's never the number one guy, which I'm not convinced that he will be like a number one and a top 4 team in either conference, like he is just a perfect number 2. And that's not easy to find. So Brandon Miller, number 1, I agree. Hit us with your number 2.
Tijan Saloon.
2 for 2. Okay. I think we only had 2 Santa laughs all of last year, maybe. So this is starting out strong. Look, I'll go with my reasoning for Tijan at 2. When you draft a project with a top 6 pick who is 18 years old, the second youngest player in the NBA, it doesn't matter how bad they look. And he's been okay, I think, this year from what you expect. You're just not going to move him by this time next year. This is going to be a long-term project with Tijan Salon. It's pretty clear they like his competitive approach, his spirit, his professionalism. And I think he's shown enough flashes here and there that you can at least see the vision of what he could potentially turn out to be, which is like a super hard playing stretch 4 who rebounds the ball at an extremely high level and has some versatility defensively. And that's not great for like the 6th pick, but look around at the rest of the draft right now and where they are and what was available on the board. Jared McCain really didn't make sense with this roster, and there's still questions there. So that's why I had Tijan Salon at 2.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's just one of those things where, I mean, like hypothetically, if maybe they were going to make some big trade and they had to throw in a young asset, I don't think he's like untouchable or anything, but it would be a very weird set of circumstances to get them there. It's hard to even really imagine it. So yeah, I think just off the fact that he's a project and they just drafted him, it's unlikely they move him.
Right. Next up, number 3. Can we keep the streak going here?
This one was a tough one. I really battled between 2.
Which way did you go?
I'm going to go Mark Williams.
Yes, there we are. 3 out of 3. Mark Williams. Why did you go Mark? Is your next one LaMelo Ball? Can I ask that? Okay, right. We're going to go there as well.
Right.
So, because we want to talk about these 2 together, because you said they were close. What made you pit Mark above LaMelo in your rankings?
Well, this is another one where it's like, okay, I don't have Mark this high because I think he's like some untouchable asset. I have Mark this high because it would just be weird to trade somebody who is at the floor of his value right now. He has been suffering major injury problems to the point where it's not like, okay, he might miss 20, 30 games a season, which there's a lot of players like that in the NBA. But it's to the point where it's like, you don't know what you're going to be able to get out of him like at all. If that's the case, it's just hard to imagine like any other team is like clamoring to move for that. Again, if there's some like unforeseen major trade that they made and he was like sort of like not a throw in, but like an extra piece to that sort of, I could see a world where they move him for like the right deal. But I think for the most part, if you're Charlotte, you're like, okay, we're 7-19. We're not that good. We're not competitive. We're not going to sell low on this young asset right now for no reason. And I don't think Mark is going to ask out or anything like, that, of course. So I had him here at 3.
Yeah, the timing of this is everything, right? We've seen him play, 6 games since he's come back from this injury. Why would you trade him now?
Right.
I do think there is a world that exists where, let's say, both Mark Williams and Nick Richards play for the rest of the season. And let's say Nick Richards outplays Mark all the way to the end. Could even earn the starting job from him at some point later in the season. I think this could be more of a question then. I don't know if I would rank him here at that point. At the moment, he's still getting benefit of the doubt for the flashes that he showed last year, just like some of the gifts that he's shown. So I completely agree with you. I do think it could be interesting. Like the Nick Richards, Mark Williams debate is closer than I ever thought it would be on like draft night of that year, because I think Nick Richards has got a lot better and he's been pretty consistent. But I still agree that he is like a borderline, Nick Richards would be a bottom 10 starter in the league or like a top 10 backup, whereas the ceiling for Mark Williams is just so much higher. I think there were rumors in the offseason that the Houston Rockets, I saw that get thrown out by the Houston Rockets beat reporter for The Athletic, that they were interested in Mark Williams. And I mean, I'm just like, the Hornets aren't even picking up the phone at that point. We've heard a lot about Mark Williams being part of the core. I think we've heard ownership say that. Mark Williams is a Duke guy. We know Rick Schnall's a big Duke guy, right? There's another link there. So I don't think Mark Williams is going anywhere soon. So I'm pretty secure with him there. And then LaMelo Ball, which is the next ranking. Some people might be listening to this going, how's LaMelo Ball not number one? He's the best player on the team. He's your max player. He's having a breakout year. How is he not the number one guy that you would want to keep? What would be your response to that?
Because LaMelo hypothetically could ask out in a way that the three guys above him couldn't. That would be the path to him being off the team. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm as frustrated as anybody else with the way that people talk about like a potential LaMelo Ball trade, which is that like, honestly, I really think the Hornets need to do that. It's like, no, they don't. The Hornets aren't trading the centerpiece of their rebuild unless something happens. I understand that he's like been on the team a while and they're not progressing the way that we want them to. But at the same time, he's 23. And this whole idea of like, okay, well, he's getting a little bit too old, so they need to move him if their rebuild is still this far away. It's like, yeah, but I mean, how much older is he than Brandon Miller? Like 18 months? Not even 2 years, right? So I just don't think worrying about the timeline in that way makes sense. I understand it maybe from the perspective of like, okay, well, he's super injury prone, and I don't think that we can build around somebody who's injury prone. And that's not an unfair point. But the problem is that if you trade him, it's not like everybody else doesn't know he's injury prone. So you're going to have a hard time getting back like a core number one guy when you're trading away your core number one guy. Because what the Hornets would be looking for if they moved off of LaMelo Ball is basically an equivalent asset. They'd be looking for a star who could be the lead on a rebuilding team. And it's like, you've already got that dude, and I'm afraid you're going to have to ride it out with the LaMelo injury stuff, even though it does worry me a lot too.
Yeah, the injury stuff is a concern, and that will negatively impact his value. I agree with you. I don't think they move LaMelo Ball for like, I don't know, expiring contracts and first-round picks.
Right.
I don't. The team is, yes, they are rebuilding now, but you do that move and it shifts your rebuild like another 3 years. That's not what this team is doing. They rebuilt the end of last year. They're rebuilding this year. After this year, the first round pick that they owe has got the requirement has gone there. I think after this year, they will be building a team to win. And I think they might consider moving LaMelo Ball if they could get an upgrade. But like you said, he's got, his play style is unique and will just not be for everyone. Some coaches will look at LaMelo Ball's game and go, that's not what our team needs to get us over the edge in the playoffs. And the injury history. And when you combine those things, you're just never going to get the value back. Not yet. Now, if he were to come back next year and to play at a more, what's the term I'm looking for here? If he was to cut out some of the mistakes in this game, the bad fouling, to cutting out one or two of the crazier shots that he takes per game, cuts down on the turnovers. If he comes back and does that, then the Hornets wouldn't want to trade him anyway, right? So,
exactly.
Because he's going to be an even better version of himself right now. So I agree. The only thing that I think is interesting is like if they in the draft were to end up at number 2 and draft someone like Dylan Harper, and then you get the whole, can you play together? You have the whole same debate that they had with Scoot and LaMelo a couple of years ago. Like maybe that makes it a little bit more likely. But again, I think you're talking more than a year down the line from now. I think we've not seen enough LaMelo Ball basketball and LaMelo Ball playing with Mark Williams and Brandon Miller. And I think they're going to give that at least the rest of this year and next year maybe at that point, let's come back and have the discussion. But
That's exactly where I am.
yeah,
And
okay,
the whole thing about like, can he play with another guy who's an on-ball creator? It's like, well, dude, he better be able to. Shoot, like there's just not many places that are going to be super competitive with one guy who's doing all the work. And it's kind of annoying me because like we drafted Brandon Miller, who is like the ultimate, like of course he can do things on the ball, but he's the ultimate like off the ball shooter, space things out, complementary star piece, or at least
hmm
that's what he has the potential to be. And you still hear this topic of conversation about the LaMelo trade. You still hear
yeah,
it's like, oh, okay, people will bring up Miller or LaMelo, like which one should they build around? It's like hopefully both, dude. The goal
yeah.
is to have multiple good players. That's how we'll get out of this, 7-19, 13th in the East, whatever slump.
And again, one of the reasons I think for Lamella being fourth is because he does have trade value, right? We talked about
Hmm.
Mark Williams, how he doesn't. Salon won't have, the same type of value that they used to get him. Lamella Ball does, and that's why he slips a little bit. But for me, this is where a tier kind of cut here. Was that the same for you, like top four, or did you have someone else in that top group?
No, this is absolutely where a tier break
Yeah.
is for me. And then honestly, after this, it starts to get like the dudes who are on the team next year, like they're under contract, but I don't feel very confident about one way or the other. If you told me right now, like the Hornets are looking to move this guy, I would be like, yeah, I could see it.
Yeah. I agree. So those four, they're going to be on the team at this time next year, almost regardless.
Hmm.
I should have mentioned at the start, by the way, we're not doing two-way guys because we just stick with 15 main roster spots. Um, Matt, give us your number 5 ranked player.
I have Miles Bridges.
Interesting. Okay. No Santa laugh. Why did you have Miles Bridges at the top of your next group?
Well, I think about, there's a group of guys here. About 5 of them are free agents. None of them are so good that I think it's a foregone conclusion that the Hornets sign them, or maybe some of them are good, I think, and I like them, but it's not a guarantee that the Hornets decide to match their contract. They're already over the cap next year. Then you have a number of guys where it's like the Bridges and the Williams and the Greens, so it's like a lot of dudes who I think could be a piece in a trade, or the Hornets could choose to move off of. The thing with Bridges is that they just so recently invested in giving him a really big contract. And to be completely honest with you, he hasn't been terrible this year or anything, but if I was another team, I wouldn't be like clamoring to pick that up. Would you?
Not from what I've seen so far.
No,
No. I mean, the one thing that does help Miles is it's a descending salary.
that's true.
So in the new cap environment, there could be teams that who are really close, that first or second apron, who might say like, we can do a like for like trade and it actually saves us money in 3 years' time. And like Miles, I think he did struggle out the gate, that's for sure. He then was just beginning to look good again, and he picked up that knee injury, and he's now coming back from the knee injury. But I agree, it's been stop start, a bit of a struggle so far. He would need to play better between now and the trade deadline, or between now and the end of the season. But I had Miles Bridges down at number 8,
Okay.
because I think if they were to make I don't think they're in love with Miles Bridges, which is why,
Okay.
negotiations ran on for so long in the summer.
Yeah.
And they've been, staring across each other at the table for a little while now. I think they didn't want to let the asset go, and they brought him back on a reasonable contract with his declining. And for me, it was a bridge contract. It was, let's give him something now, keep him on the team, he can help us. Like a lot of people have talked how he is, no matter what people say, like a lot of the players on the team consistently talk about Miles being one of the leaders, one of the guys who helps people on the team. Even if you've got your own opinion about him, that's just what the players say. Let's have him back. But I agree. When you start to look at like Miles, Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball, Mark Williams, Miles Bridges, below subpar shooting, his pretty terrible defense, and his declining athleticism are not great fits around those guys in like a playoff matchup. So I just think they could look to, and they just drafted Tijan Salon, right, who plays the same position, and they could see is a future guy there. So I had him a little bit further down because I see some potential trade opportunities with Bridges at the deadline or in the summer at the draft.
I mean, let me be clear though. I have my questions about whether or not the Hornets will actually move him and what a
Yeah,
trade would look like. If it were up to me, this would be the number one player to be trying to move off of. It's not
yeah,
even a question. Being his size with his level of defense and his level of 3-point shooting, just not the type of player that you're given 30 minutes a night to on a serious team. You can't you just in 2024, I mean going into 2025 in the NBA, that lack of versatility, that lack of effectiveness on as a two-way player, it just doesn't cut it. Um, I will say, I guess 25 million next year and 22 million in the current NBA. I feel like everybody got stuck on 20 million as the big number, and really that was a lot in 2010. It's not that much. And 15 years later, it's a
yeah.
pretty small percentage of the cap it's going to become, but still, I wonder who would make the big move for him. I do.
Well, I've got an article coming out pretty soon, and a couple of names I'll throw out, and I won't go into detail, but a couple of names to throw out that Julius Randle, Zion Williamson. Okay, that you
Zion
could.
trade. What would you think of that?
I also wrote next to my Zion trade. I have no idea what his trade value is, and you could convince me that the proposed trade I put forward was way too much, way too little. It would be a complete wild card, swing of the roll the dice. I mean, I would not want to be the executive who takes a swing on Zion Williamson. But like if he has negative or neutral trade value, like maybe Charlotte is the place that you just go, shall we? Like, because you can cut Zion Williamson because of his contract, because of injury prevention pretty quickly. But yeah, those are like two names. You're basically trading like Miles Bridges for other guys who are in weird situations where it's not working out. And you could attach first with him or other players like Nick Richards to increase that overall value. But I agree. For me, he needs to play better than he has right now for him to be tradable. But I do believe that he will play. I'm factoring in some regression to positive regression into my ranking.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
who is your number 6?
I have Grant Williams.
Yay, we're back on 6. Grant Williams, obviously out until probably January 2025 with this ACL,
Right.
guess PCL. There was 2 ligaments and meniscus, which is not a good thing at all. I mean, this has just got to come down to like who's going to trade for Grant Williams right now. Is that pretty much it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of players here who I feel like are in rotation guys who are on decent contracts who are like very movable. To me, Grant Williams is the dude who's least likely to be moved of that bunch because he's got such a major injury for so long. It would be hard to imagine what exactly a trade for him would be. I don't think the Hornets are obviously, married to him, and if he had to be matching contract in a trade, like that would be the case. But if I was another team and I was in negotiations with the Hornets, and if Grant Williams had to be matching, salary on a contract, you have to imagine, or a trade, you have to imagine it's like kind of a bigger trade, possibly, I guess, depending. But you'd probably want like one of the guys who is currently playing. So I think that makes him a little less likely and has him at 6 for me at least.
Yeah, I agree. You obviously got Miles Bridges and Salon at that position, so it's not like the Hornets are on desperate need of his services. Even though like he's got the best plus minus on the team, Grant Williams, from when he was playing earlier this year, and since he's gone out, I know there's been other injuries as well, but you can really feel he's a big miss. Now he's a great locker room leader. I've heard players talking about how he's always the one on road trips, getting people together for meals. All those little things that you need guys to do that.
Right.
And he talks as well. So even while he is out injured, I think he can probably provide value more so than, I don't know, if other players were out, like a Gordon Hayward, who probably just keeps himself to himself. But I'm kind of with you. I think they're not giving up. They're not attaching assets to trade Grant Williams away at this stage. They're not saying we need to get off this money. We're going to attach a 2nd round pick or 2 2nd round picks and let's get rid of Grant Williams. Because I don't know what they do with that like financial flexibility. It's not like they're going to go sign a big free agent.
Right.
It would have to be an opportunistic trade, like you say. And I don't think people are queuing up for an opportunity to sign a very injured Grant Williams.
Yeah.
All right, your next guy. This is going to be your number 7, I believe.
Yeah, I've got Josh Green.
You're on a roll. Look at this.
We're
Josh
way
Green.
closer than we were last year. Although,
You
like you said, we got off. Like you can get off one,
Yeah,
and one dude can snowball here for a
it
while.
can throw you
I
out of
mean,
sync for sure.
Josh Green, I feel like is a sort of comparable almost guy to Williams. He's just not hurt, so it makes him more likely to get injured. I feel like the logic is at least from like a zoomed out sort of like what would be a trade perspective. That's why Green is less likely to be on the
Yeah,
team now than Williams.
I agree. And another thing, like he is the first player that the new front office have added, right? Via
Right.
making a move, making that trade. So he is very much their guy, whereas some of these other guys are guys they've inherited. And I mean, what have you made of the Josh Green experience this year? We've not spoken about it because he wasn't on the team last year.
I think he's been okay. I mean, I don't know if the consistency is really great, or I question what is like his defensive impact at times. He's made some like really nice plays overall, but like sometimes I think that he struggles to be like a complete connector piece, and you're like, this is why the Mavs moved off of him. That's sort of my takeaway on him. It's a lot better than what we had last year, where it's like we've sort of got dudes who are running out here and they like aren't NBA players at all. Green is obviously better than that, and he's had like that shot he had to end the half, was it?
That was
Where
crazy.
he
Yeah,
yeah, like that was awesome. Like
Fields did.
he's had some good moments, right? But I just don't think he's like an incredibly high level, like maybe decision maker at times or a connector piece in the way that some other guys are.
I just put this poll on my X account. Josh Green or Cody Martin? Straight up, who do you think's better player?
I might take Josh Green. That's close though.
It is close. I think I lean Cody Martin. I think it's again it'll be one of those like, well, who were they on the court with? But if we're just saying in a vacuum, I think I lean Cody Martin a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, we're doing very well. I only had one player. You've still not mentioned my 5th ranked player yet, so I'm interested to see if they
I'm interested who that's gonna be. There's one guy. I don't know. Do we want to just go to 8?
Yeah, reveal your number 8, and we'll
Okay,
find
I've
out.
got Cody Martin at 8.
Okay.
The logic behind that is that he also sort of fits like we're saying right now. Okay, Josh Green comparable to Cody Martin. Difference with Cody Martin, first off, he's on a smaller contract. I think that makes him like slightly smaller, but that makes him more workable, I think, in smaller trades. And then on top of that, his contract is not fully guaranteed next year, so that bumps him down. But I view him, Grant, and Josh Green in a very, very similar tier.
Look, if it was my heart making this decision, I would probably have had Cody Martin maybe up around this area. I had him down at number 10.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm split is this. Cody Martin strikes me as the kind of guy who could just play for the Charlotte Hornets and retire a Charlotte Hornet. Like from the area, super low maintenance, is all about all the right things. Every coach that's ever coached him absolutely loves him. He's not the youngest. I think he's 29, I want to say already. Because he came into the league as a much older player. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're just like, you know what, every team needs your Udonis Haslem, your Nick Collinson type just to stick around. On the other side of me thinks you've got Cody Martin, who's been injured for basically 2 years. He's playing well right now. There's a lot of teams out there that need a defensive impact maker on the wing. He can make a little bit. The shot's been okay. It's been good enough. And he could help a playoff team. And if you can get any value for a guy with his injury history, that you should just cash in on that. Because, like you say, he gets one more injury, long-term injury today, and like it's gone. He's got no value anymore. So I'm kind of torn. And I tried to detach my heart from my body, and I went with my head, and I ranked him a little bit lower. But I can completely see your side of the argument. Like, you can't just trade all the veteran players, because then you just like rip out the heart of the team. And you have to keep, some of these players, your Josh Greens, your Nick Richards, your Cody Martins, You've got to keep some of them, but I do think some of them are going to end up being moved. But I'm just not sure which yet.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. I mean, we're not too far off. It is an 8 and a 10. Like Cody Martin
Yeah.
is where I start to get like pretty uncertain of what their future is on the team. Um, but I see your vision on that.
All right. Let's go with your number 9. Still haven't mentioned my 5th ranked player.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out who that is. Maybe I'm overestimating being on the roster currently next year, but I really do think that gives you more paths to being off. At 9, I had Nick Smith Jr.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. Nick Smith Jr. What are
What
your
would him be? Here's the thing. I don't think Nick Smith Jr. is going to pan out long
Okay.
term.
What would make you
But
say that?
right, it's not been good so far. His option is already picked up, and I'm
It
not
is.
saying like, oh, the Hornets wouldn't move him. And obviously, I think he's just under like $3 million a year or $3 million for next year. So I mean, he's like the ultimate. We could throw this dude in a trade guy right now. But if that trade doesn't happen, are they going to just cut him and take the loss? Are they going to intentionally move off of him for a second round pick to open the spot up for somebody else? I'm not really 100% confident one way or the other. So, I mean, at 9, I think again he's still bordering on one of the least likely or less likely guys to be on
Yeah.
the team. But I'm unsure of how exactly he gets off, even if he's bad. I mean, Book Knight made it to a 3rd year. Granted, Book Knight was a lottery pick. He was picked 11th, but Book Knight was
Mhm.
also, the same sort of like, this guy doesn't look like an NBA player basically from the jump. Smith has been the same. And if he
I
shows any life at any point in any couple of games, they'll probably just hang on to him for another year.
Yeah. So look, Nick has the rest of the season, both in the G League and with the Hornets, to make a case, right? To play a bit better. He's struggled in the G League so far when he's gone down. He's been super inefficient, like microwave score, taking a lot of shots, not hit a lot of shots, which is the kind of the story of Nick Smith, where he doesn't really defend at a high level, doesn't create a high level. He's a scorer, but he's not a scorer that you ever feel great about when you give him the ball. I think the Book Knight example is a good one. The biggest difference is this front office did not draft Nick Smith Jr.
That's a good
Again,
point.
this isn't an inherited guy. James Bouknight, Mitch Kupchak went in the press conference after they selected him and said, "Yeah, the trade offers were ringing off the phone. We had some very enticing offers and we turned them all down, and then they ended up taking Bouknight." So he had some personal investment into that paying off. I think kind of similar to what you said, it would not surprise me if they traded him for a top 55 protected second round pick, which basically is code for nothing. He looks like he could be a great Washington Wizard or Utah Jazz member if the Jazz move off someone like Colin Sexton at the trade deadline, like just to send to another young rebuilding team. So look, I do agree. He's under contract for next year. Like, would they just cut him outright? I don't know if they would.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if there is a way that they could end up moving him to free up the spot, then I could see them looking to do that, because we've seen that this Hornets team needs depth, and he's not the type of depth that helps you right now, and he's not
That's true.
shown the progress. Right, that's what you're always looking out for from young players: is have you seen progress? And there hasn't been that yet. He's still super young. He was a one and done. But you get like 2 years in the NBA. If you're not showing any progress by the end of year 2 in the NBA,
Yeah.
then you better be in a safe environment with people, surrounded people who believe in you. And I don't know if the new front office does.
That's a good point. That's very fair. I hadn't thought about him not being drafted by this current front office. Um, I'm not. I'm not really confident in his future one way or the other. I think him sticking around would be him surviving another year rather than some sort of big statement on the Hornets believing he's going to be like a major piece of their future.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next player. Give us, is this your number 10 player?
Yeah, Nick Richards.
Okay. I had Nick Richards 9, so we're pretty similar. What are your thoughts? Nick Richards, going to be moved at the deadline? Is that your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: is like if they move Richards and then like Mark Williams misses time, then you get back into this whole like we don't have a second center we can run, and we don't even
Mm-hmm.
have Grant Williams to put at the 5 this time around. Like, I mean, it's going to be Taj Gibson. It's going to get like really, really ugly. And I think even for like a rebuilding team, you want to avoid that as much as possible. You want to give everybody just like a serious NBA environment when you can. But at the same time, I mean, he's on a fantastic contract. 5 million
Yes,
bucks means that he's available to everybody. And there are
this year and next
so
year and next year as well. Yeah.
yeah, I thought it was only 2 more years. So if it's or 2.5, I mean that's pretty good. And there's so many contending teams that need that backup 5. They have no backup 5, and they're looking for a guy like that. That it really wouldn't shock me at all if the Hornets get to the deadline and they're like, we're only keeping long-term pieces. We're 10 and 25 or whatever, and we want to let's be serious about who we are right now. Richards is probably like the most likely guy to get moved because of his contract and because he certainly is not a long-term piece, and I know other teams would be interested in him.
Yeah, there was a lot of chatter at last year's trade deadline, if you remember, of him maybe going to Phoenix, other teams interested in him as well. I think he's probably got the most trade value of any of like Charlotte's low-cost tradable veteran pieces, because I think he could start like for some of these teams. He's shown as a starter, he's like a perfectly solid rebounder, rim protecting, dive center. It's difficult. He's on a $5 million contract for this year, then $5 million for next year. They can technically extend Nick Richards, but the max they can offer him is 140% of what he's currently on. So the max they can offer him is $9 million per year. That is not enough for Nick Richards, right?
Nope.
He is not accepting that, and he's also not re-signing in the summer of 2026 to come and be Mark Williams' backup. He's just not. He's going to be searching out, one, to get paid as much money as he can, because he's not been paid a great deal. And two, he's going to want to probably search for maybe a starting role at that point. So you really are on a window here where unless Mark Williams is kind of moved on that we talked about earlier, and they've decided, Nick, you are our guy, and they're going to commit to re-signing him in summer of 2026, you've got a backup center who you could have like trade value of between 2 to 4 second-round picks, or maybe even like a late protected first for a team that really needs one. Like, I think it would it would be hurtful to see, because second-round prospects who are successful and turn into like legit players, there's not been many of those for the Hornets over the years, and he is one of those. Amongst all the disappointments, he's one of the good news stories. And it would be a shame to see, because I've grown to really respect what he does, but it is feeling like the end could be coming for Nick Richards.
Yeah, what do you think they'd get for him?
So yeah, like I said there, I think Dennis Schroeder just went for what, basically 2 second-round picks, 2.5, because they swapped second-round picks. And like Dennis Schroeder was starting, and he's going to start in Golden State. That made me go, ooh, maybe not as high value as I thought. I think between like 2 good seconds would be the minimum I would probably move him for. And even then, like the Hornets already have quite a few seconds after all the trades they made this offseason. Like I'd much prefer to get, rather than just like more seconds, to get something of value. Either a protected first, if you like combined Richards and Martin together to send them somewhere to like a playoff contender, and maybe between that you get like a top 20 protected first, or swap rights to a first round pick, something like that. But again, like that's only going to happen if Richards is playing starting minutes. Like no one's giving up a first for a bench player. So if there's any big injuries to centers, I don't know, if Isaiah Hartenstein goes down for the Thunder or something like that, like keep an eye out, because that could be good news for Nick Richards.
Yeah, I think Richards has some upsides on Schroeder in the sense that his contract is longer and cheaper. That's what makes Richards such a good trade asset.
Great point.
And that's part of what makes like the Richards trade, like you kind of need to do it now. Because if you do it now, the idea that you could get like a mega protected first or from a team is like, or maybe like a good young player that they've drafted recently who's shown a little bit of upside. It's possible to imagine a scenario. I think that's very much on the high end. But if they're like, we're setting ourselves up to be great at backup at center.
If you take on like a bad salary as well, right?
That's a great point.
So you give up Nick Richards, who's good. You then send a second round pick. You take on a bad salary, and then maybe you get a first. You know, you start. There are ways to balance this out where it's not just Nick Richards for an expiring contract and 2 second round picks. Which, if that was the case, like part of me would just be like, let's hold on to him and wait around the draft, or wait till next summer, or just see what happens. Like, I wouldn't just trade Nick Richards no matter what at this deadline, but I would court for the right offer.
Yep. I completely agree.
All right. Your number 11 ranked player.
Tre Mann.
Okay. He finally makes an appearance. My 5th ranked player.
He is a free agent. He's a restricted free agent. Sure.
Yeah.
But he was also not brought in by this front office.
He wasn't.
They could have given him a contract this offseason, and they didn't. Now I think Tre Mann, to some level, this is like a prove-it year for him, and so far he's been very good. But he also hasn't played that much yet. And I think there's either a world where his level of play sort of declines to the point where it's like you've got to give him a serious contract, but maybe you don't feel like you've seen quite enough yet, or his level of play gets to the point where other teams with cap space are looking at kind of a younger guy and saying, yeah, we might want to go spend a little bit here. And Charlotte, who, as it stands right now, doesn't have salary space, it's like, I don't know if we want to start approaching the luxury tax. Not that they'd get in there. And there's a few guys I think that'll be off the team in a few ways. They'll save money. But there's a lot of paths to him not being on the team, even though he's a guy who I love. I loved when they traded for him. I liked him out of the draft. I'm hoping they keep him, and I'll be mad if they don't. But him being a free agent and him having, like, if it was a prove-it year for him, which undoubtedly it is, and he's only played 13 games, I can't be confident at all that he's going to be back yet.
So, obviously, I had him a lot higher. My reasoning is this. One, if he was an unrestricted free agent, he'd be down in this range with you. He's restricted, which means that the Hornets can match any offer they get. It also means that I think other teams are pretty unlikely to send a big offer sheet for a backup combo guard. Like, that just doesn't ever happen. Look at Isaac Okoro. Last offseason, the Cavs. I mean, he was like a defensive wing, went deep into August. They eventually came to a deal. Look at PJ Washington. What happened in Charlotte? Like, no one ever made him an offer sheet, and he ended up being in Charlotte. So, and like the combo scoring guard is something that there's always plenty of those going around in the NBA. So him, I guess, leaving or getting the offer from elsewhere doesn't concern me too much. I think the other aspect was listening to Jeff Peterson, Charles Lee talk about Tre Mann's summer, his training camp. Like, he was the MVP of preseason, right? He was the guy that everyone was like, he's taken a leap this summer with his shot making. He's the first one in, the last one out of the gym. He's everything we want players to be about here. He is well liked by all of his players and his teammates. And I think I'm taking, like, team personnel don't speak up a player unless they like really, really deserve it, especially an upcoming free agent. And the way they were talking about him just made me go, I think I have to start counting Tre Mann as part of the core. Like, because
that's what I'm hoping. I hope so as well. I guess I was frustrated when they didn't go ahead and extend them because I've been confident in his ability. Like, last year, you could tell that he had it within him. It was just a level of like, you got to start putting up the shots, dude. You know, you're no longer at OKC, right? You're no longer playing for a contender. You're playing for Charlotte, and you need to be more aggressive, right? And I think we've seen that to some level so far. We have.
And I wouldn't have minded, like, I wouldn't have minded them giving him a contract, but I never thought it was going to happen in the summer because, like, we need to see this guy play next to LaMelo Ball. We need to see what he's like in a 6-man role off the bench. And they just hadn't seen any of those things. So it would have been like, giving it, for me, it's all projection. And they probably wanted to see it this year. And like we said, he's restricted. So do it this year. You can prove it. And then we'll give you the contract and we can see it. And like after the trade deadline, spoiler, I think he will be the backup point guard and Vasilij Micic won't be on the team. And then he's going to be have that kind of clearer role. So be interested. This is our look. Last year it was PJ Washington. This year it's Trey Mann. Let's see how it plays out. But look, we both want him back on the team. I think that's pretty apparent.
Yeah, maybe I've underestimated him here in terms of just I go through this whole list thinking about like paths to be off the team. Somebody who is a free agent feels so much clearer, but maybe I overestimated that to some level. We'll see, though.
Diversity of thought is a good thing, and that's why I like doing this with you. Your number 12 player.
My number 12 is Daquan Jeffries.
Who would now Daquan Jeffries?
Right now we're in another tier.
A whole other tier.
Yeah, this is getting down to guys where it's like Jeffries has hardly played for Charlotte. He's not under contract, is he?
Well, it's all team options or unguaranteed. So he's on a 3-year contract. You look at it and you go 3 years, but it's not. It's an expiring contract for all purposes.
Right. Look, the guys below him, I like genuinely the reason why I have him here is because I think there's 3 guys below him where it's like I'd be really surprised if they were back.
Should we just do this whole last group together? Because I like.
Sure.
So go on, reel off your 13, 14, 15.
Okay. Order here is very up, but I went Curry, Gibson, Micic. Yeah, that was the 3 that you had.
3 in a row. We just matched our last 4. I had the exact same order. Jeffries, Curry, Gibson, Micic.
Right. Yeah. I think with Curry, obviously, like he's sort of a very specific role and getting older. I guess they could bring him back for another year. I mean, Taj Gibson's on the team right now, which is just shocking. Then I've got Gibson again. I wouldn't have thought that he was going to be in the NBA this year, and he is. So I guess he could be in it another year, but he's not on the team. And like, hopefully, ideally, we would have a better 15th guy than that, But he's seen some time. And then with Micic, not only is he somebody who probably like shouldn't be on the team next year and he fits in this category, but because he is a team option next year, I believe, that makes him like kind of the guy you could trade away and bring back a contract with, right?
Yeah.
So if we were talking earlier about
is the rough value of his contract for listeners who might not know. So he's more like all these other guys are like minimum 2-3 million. Whereas Micic is like 7.5. So like teams looking to duck under the tax or something of that nature, like you can do that easier by moving for Micic than it is just for trading like any old veteran minimum player.
So like when we talked about the Richards potentially like trying to package him with like maybe an expiring contract and then like bringing back a bad contract so we can get that up outside of like 4 seconds to like the wonky first, because that would be the end goal. Micic would be the guy that you would be doing that with because he is $8 million or whatever, and he can just be nullified. On top of that, it also means that if the Hornets wanted to keep him, I guess they could decline it and then bring him back. But $8 million, like you're not going to bring him back for 8. So that's
I completely agree on all of that. And like we're getting into the details here, into the weeds, but I would have thought at the start of the year, like Daquan Jeffries would have been 15th. And for him to be 12th on our rankings, I think shows like even in those limited minutes he played, he did actually play relatively well. But again, the only reason I can imagine, unless there are massive Daquan Jeffries fans, which I didn't know existed, his contract was made for trading purposes. And that's why I presumed they kept him on the team, was to act as basically trade fodder. So, but he's shown more than I thought we were going to see when he broke his hand in preseason. It's like, is he on the team? But yeah, same with the rest of those, like Curry, Gibson, they could be, even Micic could all be out of the NBA next year, like retiring, or maybe you bring one of Gibson or Curry back again in that like vet leader role. But yeah, I'm right there with you. So we are matched up there from our 12 to 15 all the way.
Yeah.
as hard as this was, we were remarkably close throughout this. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And look, we will revisit again in a year's time.
We will.
And we'll see how we get on. Any overarching thoughts on our rankings before we move on to our last little section here?
Not really. I think this has got to be the most similar we've ever been.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Like at the top and at the bottom, and in the middle, there's a few, and it's like I know they're going to trade at least one or two of Grant Williams, Josh Green, Nick Richards, Cody Martin, Nick Smith Jr. Like I just don't know which one or two.
It's three tiers. I'm pretty confident my top, I think, four guys are going to keep. Like it would be a genuine surprise if they moved off of them. Agreed. The bottom four, it would be a genuine surprise if they were back. Outside of like, I guess maybe if they just don't find a Jeffries trade and he's the 15th guy next year and he keeps playing solid, like I could see that and I wouldn't be shocked, but he's still down there. Mm-hmm. Then the entire middle seven there, I could see that going almost anyway. Outside of maybe Grant is now really, really tougher to trade because he's just not going to play next year and he's on a longer contract. But everybody else, it's like a total toss-up. It's tough to know what exactly their game plan is going to be at the deadline because we haven't really seen much from this front office. Although, to be fair, last year, I feel like a lot of my predictions were centered around knowing the front office and being like, they're always conservative. They never make these moves, and then what did they end up doing?
Yeah, and like ownership was very involved at last year's trade deadline, and like I think there will be again. This isn't a hands-off ownership group that have taken over. This is, Plotkin and Schnall are part of these discussions. So they're going to have influence here, and they were there at the trade deadline last year as well. I think what we saw in that preseason trade, where it's like, losing some flexibility for roster spot for that James Nagy, Daquan Jeffries, and 3 second-round picks trade, for me, that just sends a message they are completely still in asset gathering mode. That's what they're doing, and I expect that to continue. I expect them to want to have, if possible, probably like a bottom 5-6 record to go after Cooper Flag, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, VGK Edgecombe group, and collect assets on their way there. This is the last year I'll say that, and I've said this on the pod before, but I'm not just someone who's going to say, oh yeah, they should rebuild every year. From next year, like the pressure is on. This team needs to be competitive, pushing forward. The rebuilding is over. Like, let's make some win now moves that start adding some quality talent to this team.
Okay, well, what would you like to see at the deadline then? What would make you feel like, because we're at a point right now where even in the weak East, and even though we're not through 30 games, you're already like, we're not making the plans. We're probably already not going to make a push, which is just so bad. I thought that they could have been a rebuilding team and still at least been like within a couple of games or had like a February moment, and I guess maybe they can because I don't know how far back they are right now. It can only
if
be
they
so
stayed
crazy.
Healthy, I would have agreed with you. Like for me, like this team was, if they stay healthy, they could push for the play-in. If they're not healthy, there could be one of the worst 4 teams in the league. And so far, they've not been healthy. And now, like, to play at such a higher level to get yourself back into contention for like an 8th, 9th seed, I just think that's probably a little bit above and beyond this team by now, assuming that their health struggles will continue and not heal overnight.
Yeah, I think for me, what would make me feel good about this season that already stinks, outside of just like seeing health and growth out of the young guys, if they moved off of Bridges, if they proved that was just them being savvy and saying we don't want to lose this asset for nothing, that would make me feel good. But if going forward, it's going to be a roster that's already up against the cap and still terrible, and they're paying a guy who right now is, a no D, no 3 guy who, has been declining even at his young age, that would be a disappointment. That's the big swing. I mean, overall, I'd like to see them max out on value of the guys that they have currently that are movable, but Bridges is the big one.
Yeah, I agree in theory, but then it's like I might see the trade and be like, really? That's all they got for Bridges? So I just don't know where his trade value is right now. The sense I get is it's probably neutral or negative. And I don't know if I would want to move off him if you're having to like give up assets to do so.
Yeah.
If you're taking a player who's way worse back, but no, pretty boring. Like it would probably be decide which of these veteran players in that group of 7 you want to keep around going into next year. Decide which you get the best offers on, and that might dictate actually which one of those I move. Like, do I keep Josh Green or Cody Martin? I think there is a world where you keep both. I don't hate that. It just if they're not just selling at all costs. Like, it's not like we have to move these guys. They've got to go. It's not like Gordon Hayward last year, right? Where it's like he's going to expire. We have to get anything we can for him. I think you set your price for these guys and hope you get some better deals.
Yeah.
Before we go, at the end of each episode, for the last 2 times we've done this, we've given a Christmas gift to the Charlotte Hornets. One gift. Last year, you gave ankle braces for LaMelo Ball, which he got because LaMelo Ball was a good boy and made Santa's good list. The last 2 years, I gave a Mason Plumlee trade. Last year, I then gave a Gordon Hayward trade. So what are you giving for a gift to the Charlotte Hornets or a member of the Hornets this Christmas?
Well, I was going to say something like real boring, like a magical ping pong ball to ensure Cooper Flag. Like if you could pick any one thing to break their way right now, it'd be getting the first overall pick, no question.
Yep.
But I'll change it up here and I'll say, how about a delusional Miles Bridges trade partner will be my gift for them if I could pick one.
A delusional Miles Bridges trade partner. I like it. Okay. Mine is going to be, and it's going to be to a player as well. I'm going to give Moussa Diabate an NBA contract.
There you go. I like that one. I like that one a lot.
I think depending how things go at the trade deadline, that could be something that happens. If Taj Gibson is gone, if Nick Richards has moved, then it's definitely happening. But like I say, even if Nick Richards stays, I still think this Hornets roster, there's an argument to have for, 3 bigs, like true bigs on the roster. You'd want one of them to have a little bit more versatility and be able to play the 4, which I guess Diabate can do from a defensive point of view a little bit more. But he's earned it this year when he's got the opportunity and when he's got minutes. And again, with him being like a French-speaking guy, only French-speaking guy in the team, it's got to be nice with Tijon Salon. There's just a lot of great reasons. And he's only on a 1-year, 2-way contract. So he would be, I think, a restricted free agent this offseason. And I think they might try and get out ahead of that. And once that 50-game rule's pressing into them, they might try and convert Moussa Diabate. Because, I think he's shown that he is at least a third-string big on an NBA team.
He's an NBA player. He absolutely is. And I would be incredibly disappointed if he somehow didn't end up as, I don't want to say a long-term, but sort of like a short-term, long-term guy, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Matt, that is the end of our episode. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great Christmas and try and enjoy watching the Hornets for the rest of the year.
I'll do my best. We got the Wizards tonight, so we've got a fighting chance to play an enjoyable game. But thanks for having me. Sorry for being almost impossibly washed out, and seemingly more and more washed out as
the
episode went on.
Yeah.
I can't use my main camera on StreamYard, and that's cost me more than I could have imagined.
Yeah, well, you say there's the hopes for the win against the Wizards. When we're recording this, it's the first game against the Wizards of 2 coming up. It's also the opportunity to be further embarrassed on the NBA, which you can never rule out. Whether it's the Pistons from last year, the process 76ers, the terrible early 2010s Brooklyn Nets, the Hornets have always managed to load themselves to the level of competition. And I just go into games like this now, just praying, don't embarrass yourselves. So that's what I'll be looking out for tonight. But Matt, tell the people where they can find you if they enjoy your content.
Oh, I'm on Twitter at SponhourM, and I'm on TikTok at Sponhour, and you can find me on YouTube at Sponhour as well.
Yeah. All right, here's Matt Sponhour. I am James Plowright. Everybody, we hope this episode has helped you on your Christmas commute to wherever you are driving back home to. And we will next speak to you in 2025.